In this lesson, I want to speak about how we can build a collection of objects of type person using a for loop, and then how we can loop through this collection using the Foreach. So let's see. This time we declare a new complex custom type called person using the word class, and in this new type we have only two fields, only two public fields, underscore ID and the underscore last name. Now let's see how we build an object out of this type. The usual ways we always did is to write person p1 equals new person, and this part person p1 creates a variable in the stack memory, and this part new object creates the real object, real person object, in the heap memory and puts the address of this object in this variable p1 in the stack memory. Let's do it this time in 2 lines instead of 1. Person p1 equals null means that for now we only declare the variable, but the variable, which in stack memory contains nothing. There is no address inside p1. It holds null. Nulls mean nothing. It does not point to any object type person, to any object at all. Just null, empty. No address at all inside of p1. Now, here in the second line, we actually create the object person in the heap memory. p1 equals new person. New person means that now we are creating, we are securing a place in memory. We are reserving a place in memory, in heap memory, for object of type person. Now we have an object of type person in the heap memory, and we put the address of this new object, newly created object, in this variable, which this variable in the stack memory. But this variable in stack memory holds now the address of the object person that just created in heap memory. This opening and closing round brackets we did not explain yet. We will, not in this lesson, but we will. Now, after we have a variable p1 that points to an object in the heap memory, now we can use this variable p1 to access the fields of this object. Actually, now the object exists, so we can access its fields. Only now. After this line, we couldn't, because p1 did not hold any address to any object. It was null. Only now, after this line, when an object of type person is created in the heap memory and the address is inside p1, now we can use p1 to access its fields of this person that has been created. And the way is to type dot. And when we type dot, we will see everything that is public in person class. In this case, we have two public fields. Let's see. We type dot and we see last name and ID, these two public fields. These 1, 2, 3, 4 others that we see here, we did not speak about them yet. And also here p1 dot last name. We assign a value of Smith. ID is 123 and last name is Smith. Now we have a person p1 that points to a person in the heap memory, and this person in heap memory, its fields are containing a values now. Not only we have an object holds memory in the heap memory, but this object is filled with values. After this line, we only have a person in the memory, in the heap memory, but the values ID and last name are just the default value. Default value for int underscore ID is 0. The default value of last name of a string is string empty, like this. But now we have actually meaningful values in this object that just created. By the way, I want to show you another way how to create an object in the heap memory and to assign its fields with values right in the same command, in the same line even. The way is very simple. Instead of just writing person p1 equals person, or here p1 equals new person, we are adding the opening and closing curly brackets. And inside and between these curly brackets, we can type the public fields without using the p2 or p1, whatever. Just we know here inside these curly brackets, we know that we are referring to this object. So we do not need to write p2.id. We don't need to do that, of course. We can't do that even. We have to write only the name of the fields. So ID equals 123, last name equals Smith, and here we have an object P2 that points to a person in the heap memory, and right away we already assign values to its fields. Now this is only one object, only one person, and this one also only one object, only one person. What if we want a collection of persons? So the way is very simple. As we did with int or string, if you remember, we use the square brackets. Int square brackets creates an array of ints for us. Of course, till here, it's just a variable that points to nothing, to null. Only this part equals new int actually creates the collection, the object collection of array of int array in the heap memory. And we already tell the program to reserve 3 places for us in the heap memory, but these places are empty. So the way to assign a value to these places is int array at 0 equals something, int array at the second place equals something, and so on. Exactly the same is to create an array of persons. The way is exactly the same to write person. This is our type. Int is the type and a person is the type. Person and square brackets to choose a name for it, a name for this variable, person array, and equals new person. And here we also decide that we want this array to be of length 3. We can store 3 variable, 3 persons in 3 people in this array. And but after this line, we only tells the program to reserve a place in memory for 3 persons, but we have to create the persons itself, the people itself. So the way to create a person is as usual as we did here. P1 equals new person. We only have the variable. The variable is the element inside the array. So this is the first variable. So the way to actually create a person is the same as here. P1 equals new person as person array. So person array at the first place, the first element, equals new person. But now after this line, of course we have a person in the memory, but we have to assign a values to its fields. So here we did that exactly. Person array, first element, fields underscore ID equals 123, and fields last name equals Smith. And so on. We can continue to the next person at the second place. If you write here 1, it will be the second place, and then the third person, because we here actually decide that we want only 3 elements in this array. But as if you remember, and I hope you remember, we have a better way to build a collection of person, of anything actually. It calls list. We use the word list. List is also actually behind the scene is also a class, but we are not going to talk about it now. We use the word list and then angle brackets opening and closing, and in between the type that we want a list to build a list of. In this example, of course, we want to build a list of person class of this type person. So list, angle brackets, and inside person, and then we choose a name people. And of course we want to reserve a place in memory for it, in the heap memory. So the way to do that is new list of person. Now we have a place reserved in memory for a list of person. Of course we don't have person, even one person inside in this collection yet. But we have in the heap memory a place reserved for this list. And this is not like the array where we actually decide in advance that we want only 3 or 5 elements in this array. Here we are not going to decide how many. We can add more and more and more. So after this line we have an object called people that holds an address to an object in the heap memory, which this object is object of collection for person. Of course this collection is now empty, but we have this collection and we can use it to add person and another person to this collection. For now it's empty. And let's see how we are going to add person or some or multiple person to this object, to this collection. So the way, of course, in actual life, we will do it other way, but we'll do it differently. But here, just for the example, let's see. Person P3 equals null. For now, P3 points to nothing. It's just a variable, but it do not point to any person object. But here in the for loop, we are going to create an object, as we see here 3 times, because I is equals 0 as long as I is less than 3. So when I is 0, when it's 1, when it's 2. 3 times we'll go inside this loop. And every time we will use this this variable to create a new person. We will use the same variable over and over to create another person and another person and another person. So let's see. The first time we are going inside this for loop. P3 equals new person. Now P3 holds an address to a new person that just has been created in the heap memory. And not only that, we already set the values to the ID on the last name fields. The ID have a value of I. In the first iteration it's 0. So the first person its ID is 0, and the last name of the first person equals to just a string plus I. Last name 0. Last name 0, that's the last name of the first person. And right after that, we use the method add, that this list that we just created before have method add, and put the P3 inside the round brackets. This method takes the P3 object and adds it to the people collection. Now in people collection we have one person. Until now this people collection was empty. Now after this line we add one person, one object to the people collection. And now let's go to the next iteration. In the next iteration, I equals 1 now. So we are using the P3, the same person, which for now is not null anymore, because it points to an object, to a person. But we are telling P3 that now P3 equals to a new person, another person we just created in the second iteration. Now a new address is assigned to P3, because when we write P3 equals new person means two things. First thing is a new person created in the heap memory. A second thing, its address of this person that just created is assigned to P3 variable. So after first iteration, P3 already have an address inside. But here in the second iteration, we are telling the program to put a new address of this new person inside P3. And of course, the ID of this new person, the second one, is now 1, and the last name is last name 1. So now P3 points to the second person. It does not point to the first object, first person. How we can access the first person? Well, the answer is the first person is inside people, or a people list. We can access the first person through the collection of people. The first element inside people is the first person that was created here in the first iteration. Now in P3 we have the second, now P3 points to the second person, and we are doing the same. We are calling the method add of people collection, and we are adding the second person also to the people collection. Now in people collection we have already 2 elements. Let's see what's going on. We are going to the next iteration, the last iteration, the third iteration. Now I is 2. And we are telling the program to use this P3 variable and to create another object of type person, a third person. And in doing so, we are doing 2 things. First, we are creating the third person in the heap memory. Of course, we are assigning values to its fields. First, we are creating the new person, new object in heap memory. Second, we are assigning its address to P3. Now P3 does not point to the second person. It points to the third person. But people collection points to the first object, first person, and to the second person. It's the first element and the second element. And as we are going to see now, people collection is going to point also to the third element, the third person, using the add method. Now after this line we have a collection of 3 person in this people variable of type list of person. So we use a for loop to build a collection of person. Of course, in the real life we can use the for loop, but not this way. We're not going to choose a name, last name I, last name 0, last name 1, but we of course can use the for loop. For example, if we are going to read the data from lines in a file, so we can run through these lines of a file and to create person from the data in the file. Now, after building the people collection, now let's loop through these people and print it to the screen. Now we are going to use for each loop. And the way, as I hope you remember, we are using for each, opening and closing round brackets, and var item in people. And now in every iteration, item will hold the current person one by one. In the first iteration, item will hold the first element in the people collection. In the second iteration, item will hold the second person in people collection. And in the third iteration, item will hold the third person in people collection. And of course we are printing to the screen. Every time we are printing the item dot underscore ID, item dot last name, and every time item it's a different element. The first element, and then the second element inside people, and then the third element inside people collection. Let's see the result of this line. Right click on create new type, our project, debug start new instance, and here we have item ID 0, 1, 2, first, second, third element, and the last name is last name 0, last name 1, last name 2.